Tonight, we open the Dhammapada once again, a small and ancient book that sits at the very heart of Buddhism. For more than 2,000 years, people have read its short verses to find peace and to understand their own lives. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The book has 26 short chapters, and for the first time in this series, we will spend the night with two of them. One is called The Thousands. The other is a chapter about the wise. Together, they ask one gentle question. Of everything we say, everything we do, everything we count and chase and accumulate, what actually matters? Most of us were taught that a good life is built from more achievements, more possessions, more to show for our years. These verses suggest the opposite. What actually matters in life is less. An honest word, a day fully lived, a heart at peace. That is the teaching we will explore tonight, and we will take it slowly, one verse at a time. There is nothing you need to know to receive these verses, and nothing you will need to remember afterward. They were composed to be heard slowly, exactly like this, and they do their work simply by being heard. Wherever this finds you, let the body grow heavy, and let the breath find its own slow pace. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. One of the most universal experiences of being human is how full our lives have become. From the moment we wake, the day begins asking things of us. People to answer, tasks to finish, places to be. And running through all of it, morning to night, is a river of words. Conversations at home and at work. The news. The messages that arrive and the messages we send. And underneath everything, the steady talk of our own minds, narrating, planning, replying to things no one actually said. By the time evening comes, thousands of words have moved through us. If someone asked us to repeat them, we could recover almost none. They came, they went, and they left very little behind. And yet almost everyone, if asked, can remember one sentence. A sentence someone said years ago, maybe decades ago, that never left. A teacher said it, or a grandparent, or a stranger on a train. It took a few seconds to say, and it has been working inside us ever since. The Buddha noticed this too 2,500 years ago. He noticed that a person could hear words all day, every day, for a whole lifetime, and remain untouched by them. And that one saying, landing at the right moment, could turn a whole life like a key. He put this into one of the simplest verses in the Dhammapada. It opens the chapter called The Thousands, and it is where we begin tonight. The verse goes like this: better than 1,000 meaningless sayings is a single meaningful saying, hearing which brings you peace. The verse is not against words. The Buddha taught for 45 years. He spoke every day to farmers and kings and grieving mothers and curious children. A man opposed to words would not have left behind one of the largest bodies of teaching in human history. So, the verse is not asking us to talk less, or to distrust language, or to treat speech as the enemy of wisdom. It is a teaching about weight. 1,000 sayings can pass through a person and change nothing. They skim across the surface, the way light skims across water. One saying, truly heard, goes in. It settles somewhere below the surface and stays. And the difference between the two is not loudness or cleverness or even truth. Plenty of true things are said every day and forgotten by dinner. The difference is in the verse's last line, which is also its measure, hearing which brings you peace. That is the test the Buddha gives us. A word is worth something by what it leaves behind in the listener. Did it bring peace? Did the hearer's shoulders come down a little? Did something in them stop running, even briefly? Then it was a meaningful saying, whatever its size. If it brought only noise, more spinning, more wanting, more worry, then it was one of the 1,000, however impressive it sounded. Most of us never measure words this way. We simply take in more of them. More reading, more listening, more scrolling, hoping that somewhere in all of it, the thing that finally settles us will appear. But more does not settle us. A mind that takes in words all day keeps producing words all night. The Buddha had a name for the opposite of all this noise. When his monks gathered, he gave them a simple instruction. Speak about the teaching, he said, or keep noble silence. Noble silence was his phrase for a silence that is not empty. Not the silence of having nothing to say, but the silence of needing nothing more to be said. A full silence. The kind of silence the right word leaves behind it. That silence is what this verse is protecting. One meaningful saying, and then room for it to land. Let us explore a story about this. There was once a woman who kept a tea stall in a town market. She had inherited the stall from her mother, and the spot was a good one, near the well, where everyone passed at least once a day. She was warm and quick, and people liked her. She was also, by her own private knowledge, someone who talked. She had talked all her life. She greeted every customer with a stream of pleasant words, asked after their families, filled every pause with another question, or a small story, or a remark about the weather. If a silence opened between her and another person, she closed it, gently and immediately, the way one might close a door against a draft. She had done this for so long that she no longer noticed she was doing it. The talking served her well at the stall. But in the evenings, when the market emptied and she walked home through the lanes, she often felt a particular tiredness that was not in her feet or her back. Her jaw was tired. Her voice was tired. And somewhere under the tiredness was a feeling she could not have explained to anyone. The feeling of having spoken all day and said nothing. Thousands of words had left her since morning. She could not remember any of them, and she suspected no one else could either. She carried this feeling for years. It did not trouble her loudly. It was just there, in the evenings, like a small stone in a shoe she had learned to walk with. Among her customers was an old man who came once a week to buy tea leaves. He had been a school teacher long ago, people said. He was one of the few who did not chat. He would greet her, name the tea he wanted, and wait, watching the market move past with an easy patience, while she weighed and wrapped his small parcel. For years she had filled those waits with talk, and he had received the talk kindly and answered little. One evening, late in the day, he came to the stall just as a soft rain began. The market was emptying early. The two of them stood under her awning while she wrapped his tea, the rain making its even sound on the cloth above them. She was tired that day, more than usual, and for once the stream of her talk ran low. She wrapped the parcel in quiet, her fingers working the string. The old man watched her hands for a moment. Then he said, in the plain way he said everything, "You know, you do not have to fill every silence. Your company is enough without all the words." He took his parcel, nodded his thanks, and walked off into the rain. She stood under the awning, with the string still between her fingers. The rain went on. The market went on emptying, and the sentence stayed exactly where he had set it down, in the middle of her, with a weight she could feel. She thought about it that night, and the next day, and for many days after. It was such a small sentence. He had not scolded her. He had given her something, a kind of permission she had not known she was waiting for. Your company is enough. She did not become a silent woman. She still greeted her customers, still asked after their families, still laughed easily at the stall. But the silences stopped frightening her. When a pause opened now, she let it stay open, and she discovered that most people did not rush to fill it either. They simply stood with her for a moment, in the pause, and something passed between them there that all her years of talking had never quite carried. She kept the stall into her old age, and of all the words that passed through it in her lifetime, the many thousands she spoke, and the many thousands she heard, the ones she remembered at the end were 11 words, said once, under an awning, in the rain. The old man's sentence did something that years of pleasant conversation had not done. It was not eloquent. It was not clever. It was simply true, and it was offered with full attention, at the right moment, to the right person, and then left alone. He did not explain it, or repeat it, or stay to watch it land. He gave it the way one gives a seed to soil, trusting it to know what to do. The mind does not keep words by how many there were. It keeps them by how deeply they landed. Words said in passing wash out with the day. Words said with full attention, by someone who truly sees us, stay. They settle somewhere deeper in us, and they last. That is why a single sentence from years ago can still be with us when everything said since has been forgotten. This is what the verse means by better. The woman at the tea stall had been measuring words the way most of us do, by their flow, by the comfort of their steady supply. The old man measured them the way the Buddha did, by what they leave behind. Hearing which brings you peace. His sentence brought her decades of it. Let us explore another story. There was once a young monk who was known throughout his monastery for the beauty of his speaking. When it was his turn to give the evening talk, the hall filled. He could speak about the teaching for an hour without notes, and his sentences came out shaped and shining, one after another, like bowls from a skilled potter's wheel. The older monks praised him. Visitors asked for him by name. He was, everyone agreed, a gifted teacher, and he was not yet 30. In the same monastery lived an old monk who almost never taught. He had been there longer than anyone could establish. He kept the garden, ate with the others, sat in the hall morning and evening, and when he was asked to give a talk, which still happened once or twice a year, out of respect, he would say a few sentences, sometimes only one, and then sit down. The young monk had always found this faintly disappointing. So much seniority, he thought, and so little to say. One autumn, after an evening talk that had gone especially well, the young monk found himself restless. The praise was still warm in his ears, and yet something in him felt oddly hungry, the way one feels after a meal of sweets. On an impulse he did not fully understand, he walked to the garden the next morning and found the old monk kneeling among the last of the season's vegetables. "May I ask you something?" the young monk said. The old monk sat back on his heels and gave him his attention. "Of course. Why do you teach so little? You have practiced longer than anyone here. You must have more to say than all of us." And yet when they hand you the hall, you give them one sentence and sit down. The old monk pulled a weed, shook the soil from its roots, and set it aside. He seemed to be considering the question honestly rather than reaching for a prepared answer. "May I ask you something first?" he said. "Of course. Last night you spoke for an hour. It was a fine talk. I was there." He looked up at the young monk. "Tell me one sentence from it. Not the cleverest one. Just one sentence you said last night that you still believe this morning, kneeling here in the garden, with the same weight you believed it in the hall." The young monk opened his mouth. He had said so many things. He began searching back through the talk, through its movements and its turns, and he found that he could remember the general flow of it, but the sentences themselves had gone soft. The few he could recover sounded different out here, in the plain morning light, with the smell of turned earth around them. They sounded like things a speaker says. He stood there for a long moment. "I cannot," he finally said. The old monk nodded. "There was no triumph in it. That was my difficulty too, when I was your age," he said. "I could fill an hour. I could not fill a sentence." He stood, brushing the soil from his knees, and looked at the young monk with real kindness. "I will give you what my teacher gave me," he said. "One sentence. Carry it for a year before you give another talk. Do not explain it to anyone. Do not improve it. Just carry it and see what it does." "What is the sentence?" The old monk said, "Nothing is missing from this moment." The young monk waited for more. There was no more. The old monk picked up his basket and returned to the vegetables. The year that followed was the hardest of the young monk's life in the robes, and the most important. Stripped of his talks, he had nothing to shape, nothing to polish, nothing to be praised for. There was only the sentence, riding with him through the days. Some days it seemed too simple to bother with. Some days it irritated him. And then there were days, more of them as the year went on, when he would be sweeping a corridor or washing a bowl, and the sentence would open under him like a floor he had not known was there, and he would stand still in the middle of the task, with nothing missing. When the year ended, he gave his next talk. It lasted a few minutes. He said what he had found and sat down. The hall was quieter afterward than it had ever been, after his hour of shaped and shining sentences, and the silence was not empty. It was the other kind. People rose gently and went to their rest, carrying something, the way one carries a full bowl, with care, trying not to spill it. He taught that way for the rest of his life. Rarely, briefly, and only what he had carried long enough to weigh. The old monk in the garden was practicing something the Buddha taught directly and named. It is called right speech, and it is one part of the Eightfold Path, the Buddha's description of how a wise life is actually lived. Right speech is usually summarized in 4 measures. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it helpful? Is it the right time? Words that pass all 4 tests are rare, which is exactly the point. The teaching was never meant to produce more careful talkers. It was meant to produce fewer, weightier words. But there is a deeper layer to right speech, one that takes longer to see. The Buddha placed speech on the path alongside action, not alongside thought, where we might expect it. In his understanding, words are not descriptions of things. Words are acts. They land on people and do things to them, the way a hand does. A careless word can stay in a person for 30 years. So can a kind one. Anyone who doubts that words are acts has only to remember the sentence they themselves have been carrying since childhood. It is still in there, doing whatever it does. This is why one word can outweigh 1,000. The 1,000 were sounds. The one was an act, performed with full attention, at the right moment. The old school teacher under the awning performed such an act. The old monk in the garden performed another. Neither of them said anything complicated. They simply put the whole of their attention behind a few true words, and the words went in like seeds and grew for decades. The verse, in the end, is not only about how to speak, it is about how to receive. It tells us what to listen for in the flood. Out of the thousands of words that will pass through tomorrow, most are weather. But somewhere in them, perhaps, is the one carrying weight, the one that brings peace on hearing. The practice is to be the kind of stillness in which that word, when it comes, has somewhere to land. Tonight, you do not need any more words than you have already received. The day gave you thousands. They have done whatever they came to do, and they are finished now. You do not have to sort them, or answer them, or carry a single one of them any further tonight. If one phrase from the day was a true one sentence from a friend, or from these hours together, or from somewhere long ago that surfaced on its own, you can let it stay. One is enough. The verse says so. One meaningful saying, and peace on hearing it. Everything else can drain away now, the way water drains from sand. The conversations, the news, the opinions, the talk of the mind itself. Let the volume of the day grow distant, like a market closing street by street, until what remains is what was always underneath it. The breath, the bed, the dark doing its old kind work. Rest in the silence the right words leave behind. There is nothing more that needs saying tonight. When you are ready, we will continue. Almost everyone carries, somewhere, the wish to be different than they are. Calmer, kinder, less worried, more patient with the people we love. It is one of the most human wishes there is, and almost everyone has tried, at some point, to make it happen by force. We know how those attempts go. The resolution made on a Sunday evening, the promise to stop worrying, starting now, the stern talk we give ourselves in the mirror. For a few days, something holds, and then the old patterns return, like water returning to its old channels, and we add one more failure to the list, and we conclude that we are simply not strong enough to change. The Buddha watched people exhaust themselves this way. He had exhausted himself this way in his years of harsh striving before his awakening, and he had set that approach down as something that does not work. What he offered instead is gathered into a single verse in the chapter on the wise. It is a verse about water and arrows and timber, and it places the work we do on ourselves in very different company than force. The verse goes like this: irrigators guide water, fletchers straighten arrows, carpenters carve timber, the wise tame themselves. The irrigator stands in a field with water that wants to go its own way. He does not command the water. He cannot. Water does not take commands. What he does is study where it wants to go and then dig his channels so that where it wants to go and where he needs it to go become the same place. He works with the nature of water, and the water, guided rather than forced, feeds the whole field. The fletcher takes a length of wood that grew bent in the forest. He does not break the wood straight. He warms it, eases it, sets it aside, and returns to it as many times as the wood requires. The carpenter is the same. He reads the grain before he cuts. He knows that timber worked against its grain splits, and timber worked along its grain opens. And then the fourth line, the wise tame themselves. The verse is saying that a person is also a material. We have a grain, like timber. We have channels we already run in, like water. And the wise, the verse says, work on themselves the way the craftsmen work, with patience, with knowledge of the material, with respect for its nature. They do not break themselves into a better shape. They guide themselves there. The word tame can sound stern in English. In the Buddha's usage, it was gentle. He often compared the training of the mind to the gentling of a fine horse, and he was clear about how a fine horse is gentled. It is won, not broken. A horse broken by force obeys and is ruined. A horse gentled by patience becomes a companion, willing and quick, because its trust was earned. The Buddha said the mind is tamed the same way. By a steady hand it has learned to trust. This is almost the opposite of how most of us were taught to change. We were taught campaigns. We were taught willpower, deadlines, before and after. The craftsman in the verse has none of these. He has only his material, his patience, and his returning. He does not expect the water to be guided in a day. He does not stand over the timber demanding it open. He comes back, morning after morning, and does the small next thing, and trusts the nature of the work. Anyone who has tried to simply stop worrying knows the difference the verse is pointing at. The order goes out, the mind agrees to it, and within the hour, the worrying has returned, wearing a different coat. It is not that we are weak. It is that we were using the wrong craft. A worried mind is not a disobedient servant. It is water running in a channel it has run in for years, and water is not argued out of its channel. It is offered a better one, a little at a time, by someone patient enough to keep digging. The verse makes one more promise, hidden in its structure. The irrigator's work is possible because water has a nature that can be worked with. The carpenter's work is possible because wood does. And the wise can tame themselves because a person, too, has a nature that cooperates when it is approached rightly. We are workable. That is the good news buried in these 4 lines. Whatever we are now is not the final shape. It is the material. There is an old story about this. There was once a farmer who inherited a stretch of dry land in a wide valley. A river ran along the edge of the property, and the whole question of his life, as it had been the whole question of his father's life, was how to bring the water from the river to the fields. He was a strong young man, and he went at the problem with strength. He built a dam to push the river where he wanted it. He cut his channels in straight lines because straight lines were the shortest way, and he walled them high where the land disagreed with him. He worked tremendously hard, and every season the water found a way to disappoint him. It pooled where he did not want it. It seeped away where he needed it. When the rains came heavy, it leaned on his straight walls until they gave. This went on for years. Each season he rebuilt, a little stronger, a little higher. Each season the water and he fought to a draw. His fields produced, but never well, and the work of forcing them wore on him as it had worn on his father. His wife could tell by the set of his shoulders coming up the path what the water had done that day. One spring, when he was past 50, a storm came through the valley in the night, heavier than any he could remember. He went out at first light and found that the river had taken his dam. He stood at the edge of his land in the grey morning, mud to his ankles, ready to count his losses. But the water had not flooded the fields. Freed of his dam, it had spread itself into the low ground, following a winding line down through his property, and it was moving gently, almost carefully, along a path he had never dug. He stood there for a long time, watching it. The path the water had chosen ran within reach of every field he owned. It was not straight. It wandered like a thing taking its time, and it was better than anything he had built in 30 years. He did not rebuild the dam. That season, he dug his channels along the lines the water had shown him, low where it wanted low, curved where it wanted to curve. The work was easier than any digging he had ever done, because the land agreed with every cut. By midsummer, his fields were greener than his father had ever seen them. The change reached his house before the harvest did. His wife noticed it first, in the way he came up the path in the evenings. The set of his shoulders, which had reported on the water for 30 years, had gone easy. He lingered at the table after meals. He slept through the rains that once would have had him out with a lantern, checking his walls, because there were no walls left to check. The water was where it wanted to be, and so, at last, was he. He farmed another 25 years. The neighbors noticed two things about him in those years, and spoke of both. The first was his fields, which became the best in the valley. The second was the man himself, who had somehow, in his 50s, become unhurried. When the young farmers asked him his secret, he would walk them to the river and point at the water and say, "I stopped telling it where to go. I started asking it where it wanted to go. It turned out we wanted the same thing." For 30 years, the farmer had treated the water as an opponent. The morning he stood in the mud and watched it find its own way, he understood that it had never been opposing him. It had been showing him, season after season, exactly where it wanted to go. All his exhaustion had come from refusing to look. It is the same with the work we do on ourselves. What we force resists. What we guide cooperates. The worry we order to stop does not stop. It pushes back, as water pushes on a wall. The habit we attack defends itself. But the same worry, given a little room and a patient eye, begins to show us its shape, and a thing whose shape we know can be worked with. Shunryu Suzuki, a Zen teacher who carried these teachings from Japan to the West in the last century, put it in a way his students never forgot. The best way to control a cow, he said, is to give it a large, spacious meadow. Watching it in a wide field, you come to know it, and knowing it is the beginning of everything. The farmer gave the water its meadow at last, and the water, known instead of fought, fed his whole valley. Here is another story. There was once a young man who arrived at a mountain monastery with great seriousness. He had read about meditation for years and had finally left his town to learn it properly. On his second day, the monk who managed the work of the monastery assigned him to the carpentry shed to assist the old monk who built and repaired the monastery's furniture. The young man was polite about it, but inside he was dismayed. He had not crossed 3 provinces to sand table legs. He decided he would do the work quickly and well, so that he might be released to the meditation hall sooner. The old carpenter monk was a small man with thick hands who said very little. On the first morning, he set the novice to cutting pegs from a length of oak, showed him the cut once, and went back to his own bench. The novice set to it with his usual speed. By midday, he had a pile of pegs, and nearly half of them were split. The old monk came over, looked at the pile without any expression the novice could read, and separated the split pegs from the whole ones. Again, he said. The novice cut pegs for 3 days. He could not understand it. He was careful. He was strong. His lines were true, and still the oak kept splitting. On the third afternoon, his frustration finally came out of him. "Forgive me," he said, "but I did not come here for this. I came here to learn to meditate." The old monk nodded slowly, as if this were reasonable information. "Yes," he said, "that is why you are here." The novice looked at the bench, at the oak, at his small pile of ruined pegs. He did not see how any of it was meditation, and he said so. The old monk came and stood beside him. "Cut one," he said. The novice set the chisel and drove it, quick and sure, the way he did everything. The oak split. Again, the old monk said, "Slowly this time. Let the wood decide the pace." The novice set the chisel again. This time the old monk laid his thick hand over the young man's hand, and together they pressed, far more slowly than the novice would ever have pressed on his own. And under that slowness the novice felt something he had not felt in 3 days of cutting. He felt the oak. He felt the grain take the edge and guide it, felt a thin moment of resistance, felt the wood give and open cleanly along its own line. The peg came away whole. The old monk took his hand back and returned to his bench. "The wood was never refusing you," he said. "You were not listening to it." The novice stayed in the carpentry shed for a full year. Somewhere in that year, without any announcement, his time in the meditation hall changed. He stopped driving at his own mind as he had driven at the oak. He learned to sit with it slowly, to feel for its grain, to let it open along its own lines rather than where he demanded it split. The older monks noticed the change in him before he noticed it himself. He stayed at that monastery all his life, and in time he became its teacher. He kept a workbench in the corner of his room until he was very old. When new arrivals came to him full of seriousness, asking how quickly they could learn to meditate, he would smile and send them to the shed. What the old carpenter gave the novice has a name in the Buddhist tradition. The word for meditation in the Buddha's language is bhavana, and it does not mean concentration, or discipline, or effort, though it can include all of these. It means cultivation. It is a farmer's word. It is what a person does with a field, season after season, knowing that no one can force a seed to sprout, and knowing equally that a field tended every day will not fail to grow. The Buddha chose his images for this work carefully, and almost all of them are gradual. He said the practice deepens the way the ocean floor deepens, shelving gently, with no sudden drop. He said no one can say of the mind, "Today I will be free of restlessness by sundown," any more than a farmer can say, "Today the grain will ripen because I demand it." What the farmer can do, he said, is plow and water and tend. The ripening follows on its own, in its own season. This is the heart of the verse, and it carries the thread of our whole night together. The work is small, and the work is single. One channel dug along the water's own line. One peg cut at the wood's own pace. One return to the breath, made gently and then made again. Nothing about the wise in this verse is large or dramatic. They have simply learned what every craftsman knows, that the material responds to patience and goes silent under force, and they have turned that patience on the nearest material of all. We are not asked to defeat ourselves. We are asked to learn our own grain. Let the body settle a little deeper here. There is nothing in you that needs forcing tonight. If there is some part of yourself you have been campaigning against, the worrying, the rushing, the old habit that has outlasted every resolution, you can set the campaign down for these hours. It was tiring work, and it was not working anyway. The craftsmen in the verse all go home in the evening. The water keeps moving without the irrigator. The timber rests on the bench. The material is allowed its night, and the shaping continues all the same, slowly, in the dark, as trusted things do. You are the material, and you are allowed your night. Whatever in you is being slowly straightened does not need your effort now. It needs exactly what you are doing. Lying still, breathing, being returned to, gently, tomorrow. Rest here a while. When you are ready, we will continue. There is a feeling that visits most people somewhere in the middle of their lives. The feeling that time is moving faster than it used to. A season ends, and we are not sure where it went. A year turns, and the year behind it is a blur of doing. We were there for all of it, in one sense. We worked, we answered, we kept everything running. And yet, looking back, whole months seem to have passed without us, as if we were away on some errand, while our own life went by. The feeling frightens people a little, in a way they rarely say out loud. The fear is not of time itself. It is the suspicion that the years are passing faster than they are being lived. The Buddha spoke directly to this fear. He spoke to it in a verse that, on first hearing, sounds almost like a riddle. It comes from the chapter called The Thousands, the same chapter that opened our night. The verse goes like this: better to live a single day seeing rise and fall than to live 100 years blind to rise and fall. The verse is not really comparing lengths of time. It is comparing two ways of being inside time. There is time that is seen, and there is time that merely passes. The 100 years in the verse are not bad years. Nothing terrible happens in them. They are simply unseen years, lived as most hours are lived, with the body in one place and the attention somewhere else, on the next thing, the last thing, the thing that might go wrong. And then there is the other kind of time. The verse calls it seeing rise and fall, and the phrase is simpler than it sounds. Rise and fall is just the actual texture of a moment. A breath rises and falls. A feeling arrives, stays a while, and leaves. A sound begins and ends. The light comes up in the morning and goes down in the evening. Everything we will ever experience comes and goes in this way, rising and falling, and to see rise and fall simply means to be present while it happens. Present for the breath while it is breathing. Present for the morning while it is morning. The blindness in the verse, then, is not a failing of the eyes or the intelligence. The blind years are full of capable people doing necessary things. It is only that the person is elsewhere while doing them. The hands are on the task, and the mind is 3 tasks ahead, and the moment, which rose and fell only once and will not come again, went unseen. The Buddha was not scolding anyone for this. He was describing it, the way a friend describes something we have not been able to see about ourselves so that we finally can. A nearby verse in the same chapter says it another way. Better one day lived with a still and seeing mind, it says, than 100 years lived without ever once being still. There is a generosity hidden in this teaching, and it is easy to miss. The verse does not say that a life of unseen years is ruined. It does not add up the blurred seasons and hand us a judgment. It says something far kinder. It says that one day of true seeing counts in full, whenever it comes. Presence is not a savings account, where the early deposits matter most. A single attended day, arriving in a person's 40th year, or their 70th, or tonight, is worth what it is worth, completely, and nothing that came before can disqualify it. This means the door the verse describes is never closed. The years that passed in a blur are simply years that passed in a blur. They asked a great deal of us, and we met them the best we could. The verse is not pointing backward at them. It is pointing at the day we are in, the only one ever actually offered, and saying that this one, fully seen, outweighs a century of the other kind. There was once a ferryman who worked a wide, slow river between two market towns. He had taken over the crossing from his uncle as a young man, and he rode it for 40 years. He knew the river well. His hands knew the oars. His back knew the current. He could make the crossing in any weather, at any hour, and he was known up and down the river as the most reliable ferryman anyone could remember. And yet, in all those years, he was almost never on the river. His body made the crossings. His mind was always somewhere else. Going over, he was thinking about the passengers waiting on the far bank. Coming back, he was thinking about the toll for the boat repairs, or the price of rope, or a word someone had said to him that morning that had sat wrong. 40 years of crossings, 10,000 of them or more, and he could not have said what any single one of them had been like, because he had not been present for any single one of them. The river was the thing his life happened on, and he had never once seen it. He did not know this about himself. There was no reason he would. His days were full, his work was good, and a mind that is always elsewhere feels normal to the person living in it, because there is no comparison. One winter morning, he came down to the landing before dawn, as he always did, and found that ice had sealed his mooring rope to its post in the night. He set a bucket of water to warm over the brazier. There was nothing to do until it warmed, and the dock was empty, and the small tasks he usually filled his waiting with were frozen shut, along with the rope. So he stood at the post with his hand resting on the knot, and waited. And because there was nothing else for his hands to do, he felt what was under them. The cold fibers against his palm, stiff with frost, each strand distinct. He heard the water moving under the dock, a soft, continuous sound, water against wood, that had been playing beside him for 40 years. The light was just coming up, grey and rose, over the far bank, and the surface of the river took the light and moved it slowly downstream. He stood there with the rope in his hand, and something turned over in him, gently, like a boat swinging on its anchor. He had crossed this river 10,000 times. He was feeling it for the first time. He freed the rope when the water warmed, and made his crossings that day as he always had. Nothing outward changed, that day or any day after. He did not leave the river or take up a new life. But the crossings changed. He began to be on them. He felt the pull of the current in his shoulders and the knock of the oars in their locks. He saw how the light lay differently on the water in the morning and the evening, in summer and in winter, and how no two crossings in 40 years of identical crossings had ever actually been the same. He worked the ferry another 15 years. Passengers in those years sometimes remarked, to each other more than to him, that there was something about riding with the old ferryman. The crossing felt unhurried with him at the oars, even when it was quick. People stepped off his boat a little easier than they had stepped on. No one could say why, and he never explained. But the ones who rode with him often had, for the length of one crossing, the experience he had found at the end of his dock that winter morning. They were, briefly, exactly where they were. The ferryman's first 40 years were not wasted. He raised a family on that river. He carried a whole town's worth of people safely back and forth for half a lifetime. The verse would not call those years nothing, and neither should we. But there is a difference between a life that is long and a life that is large, and the ferryman found it standing on his own dock. The 40 years were long. The winter morning was large. One held more of him than the other, and once he had felt the difference, he could never again mistake the two. His remaining years on the river held no more days than before. They simply held more life per day, because he was present inside them while they happened. Most of us have a river like his, some piece of our life so familiar that we stopped seeing it years ago. The street we walk every day, the face across the table, the work of our own hands. Familiarity is a kind of frost that forms over things slowly, and we do not feel it forming. The ferryman's gift, that winter morning, was a delay just long enough for the frost to melt. And what was underneath had been there the whole time, waiting to be felt. The river had been speaking under his dock for 40 years. This is what the verse is weighing when it sets one day against 100 years. Not the hours on either side, but how much of the person was there for them. There is another story about this. There was once an elderly nun who lived in a small temple, and a niece who loved her and visited when she could. The nun was well into her 80s. She was in good health for her age, still keeping her small garden, still rising for the morning bell, but her age had become a fact that the family discussed in worried voices on their way home from visits. One spring afternoon, the niece came to the temple in low spirits. Her aunt had been a steady place her whole life, and lately the visits had begun to ache in advance. They drank tea in the small room off the garden, and the niece grew quieter and quieter, until finally it came out of her. "I think of you here," she said, "and it makes me sad. You have so little time left." The old nun set down her cup, and to the niece's surprise, she laughed. It was a warm laugh, with no edge in it at all. "That may be," she said. "May I ask you something first?" The niece nodded. "How much time did you have yesterday?" The niece did not understand the question. "Yesterday?" "The same as anyone." "A day." "And where did it go?" The niece thought. Yesterday had gone the way her days went. Errands, work, the bus, her thoughts running ahead of her from morning until night. She could remember almost nothing of it. "It went by," she said. "Ah," said the old nun, and poured more tea. "Then let me show you what I do with mine, and you can tell me afterward which of us is short of time." And for the next hour, the old nun did nothing unusual at all, except that she did it with her niece beside her, and named things, softly, as they came. "The tea is still too hot," she said, holding her cup. "Now it is cooling. Feel the cup change in your hands." A bird crossed the open window, and she watched its whole crossing, and the niece, following her aunt's eyes, watched it too. The swoop and the vanishing, a thing of 2 seconds that she would never have seen. The afternoon light moved slowly across the floorboards, and at some point the old nun said, "It reaches the second board by this hour in spring. In summer it does not reach it at all." They heard the temple bell ring once, and the old nun held up her hand gently, and they listened together until the very end of the sound, to the place where the ringing became the silence. It was, by the clock, 1 hour. The niece would say, years later, that it was the longest hour of her life, and she meant it as the highest praise. She had been inside every minute of it. The tea, the bird, the light on the boards, the long tail of the bell. By the time she rose to leave, the ache she had arrived with had changed into something she did not have words for yet. At the gate, she turned back. "I take it back," she said. "I do not think you are short of time at all." The old nun smiled. "Time is not what I am given less of," she said. "A day is a day, for me and for you. I have just learned to be home when it arrives." What the old nun was practicing has been at the center of the Buddha's path from the beginning. He gave a short teaching on it that the tradition has treasured for 25 centuries, sometimes called the teaching on a single excellent night. "Do not chase after the past," he said, "and do not place your longing in the future. The past is gone. The future has not arrived. See, instead, what is arising right here, right now, and know it fully while it is here. A person who lives this way," he said, "has had what he called a single excellent night, and one such night is a treasure." It is the same weighing as our verse. One day, one night, 1 hour, fully inhabited, set against any quantity of absent time, and the small full measure wins. Thich Nhat Hanh, a beloved Vietnamese teacher of our own era, taught the same thing in the plainest possible setting. "Wash the dishes," he said, "to wash the dishes. Not to get them done, not to be free of them, not while living in the moment when they will be finished. Feel the warm water. Hold each bowl as if holding something that matters, because you are." He said that a person who cannot be present for the dishes will not be present for the tea afterward either, because they will be drinking it already thinking of the next thing. The dishes are not in the way of life. The dishes are the life, the portion of it that is actually here. This is where the thread of our night has led. One word, heard fully, outweighs 1,000. One day, seen fully, outweighs 100 years. The teaching keeps arriving at the same small door. What matters is never the quantity we have managed to gather. It is the single near thing, the one in front of us, received completely. Tonight is one of the days the verse is talking about. However the year has gone, however many of its months went by in a blur, none of that touches this hour. This hour is here now, and it is available to be lived in full, and living it in full asks nothing of you that is not already happening. The body has weight, and the bed is holding it. That can be felt. The breath is rising, all on its own, and falling, all on its own. That can be felt too. The room holds its small sounds, and outside the window the night is going on, rising and falling like everything else. You are here for it. That is the entire practice, the verse asks. Not 100 years of it. Just this. Let the breath rise and fall a few more times, and be there while it does. When you are ready, we will continue. Two people can hear the same words and walk away with entirely different things. It happens every day. A teacher speaks to a room, and one listener is changed by the hour, while the person beside them forgets it by dinner. A friend offers the same advice to two people, and in one of them it takes root, and in the other it finds no ground at all. Even within a single life it happens. We hear a thing at 30 and it passes through us. We hear the same thing at 50 and it stops us where we stand. The difference is rarely in the words. The words were the same words. This is one of the gentlest puzzles of being human, and the Buddha gave it a verse. It comes from the chapter on the wise, and it does not explain wisdom by what the wise know, or what they have studied, or how cleverly they speak. It explains wisdom by how they receive. The verse is an image, and the image is water. The verse goes like this: like a deep lake, clear and unclouded, so clear are the wise when they hear the teachings. The verse does not say the wise hear better teachings. It does not say they have better teachers, or better memories, or quicker minds. It says that when they hear, they are like a deep lake. A shallow puddle is stirred by anything: a pebble, a breeze, a footstep on the path beside it, and the whole of it is in motion, clouded from edge to edge. Whatever falls into it is tossed around on the surface and thrown back out. A deep lake receives the same pebble differently. The surface barely moves. The pebble sinks, slowly, through water that stays clear around it, and comes to rest at the bottom, and is kept there. Depth, in this verse, is not intelligence. The deep lake is not cleverer than the puddle. Depth is undisturbedness. It is the amount of stillness a person brings to the moment of hearing. The same true sentence that skips off a churning mind sinks all the way into a settled one. That is the whole difference between the listener who is changed and the listener who forgets, between the advice that takes root and the advice that finds no ground. The words were never the variable. The water was. The Buddha understood this about his own teaching. In the old discourses, before he taught anything, he almost always began with the same small instruction. Listen, he would say, and attend closely, and I will speak. He did not begin with the teaching. He began by asking for the lake. He knew that the most precious sentence in the world, dropped into a stirred mind, is just one more thing swirling. And most of our minds, most of the time, are stirred. We arrive at every conversation straight from the last one. We hear the people we love while composing our reply. We read in snatches, between other things, with the day's residue still turning in us. Then we wonder why nothing we take in seems to settle us, and we go looking for better words. More books. Wiser teachers. Some sentence powerful enough to land in moving water. This is also why the same words meet us so differently at different times of life. A book that did nothing for us at 30 undoes us at 50, and we say the book grew wiser while it sat on the shelf. The book did not change. The water did. Some loss, or labor, or long stretch of years stilled something in us, and the same sentences finally had somewhere to land. The verse turns us around. It says the work was never out there in the supply of words. The work is the stilling of the water that receives them. And there is good news folded inside this, the same good news water has always carried. Stillness is not something a lake does. It is what a lake returns to, all by itself, the moment nothing is stirring it. Let us explore a story about this. There was once a clerk who worked for a cloth merchant in a busy market city. He was a conscientious man who kept the accounts of a large warehouse, and his days were full from the first bell to the last. Columns of figures, deliveries, small disputes, the steady talk of the trade. Once a year, a respected teacher visited the city and gave a public talk in the courtyard of an old temple. The clerk attended every year. He had attended for 20 years. He considered it important, as a man considers his one yearly visit to the hills important, and he never missed it. He could have repeated much of what the teacher said. The talks did not change greatly from year to year, and the clerk had a good memory. He knew the teacher's opening line by heart, because it was the same every year. And yet, in 20 years, the talks had changed nothing in him. He always came straight from the warehouse. That was the trouble, though he never thought of it as trouble. He would close the ledgers at the last moment, hurry through the streets, and take his seat with the day still running in him. While the teacher spoke, some back room of the clerk's mind went on adding figures, rehearsing the morning's dispute, worrying at the late shipment. He heard every word, and every word landed on moving water. He walked home the same man who had arrived, and he assumed this was how such talks were for everyone. Pleasant, improving, and gone by morning. In his 21st year, the day of the talk fell strangely. A shipment he was meant to receive that afternoon was delayed on the river, and the merchant sent him home early, and so the clerk arrived at the temple a full hour before anyone else. The courtyard was empty. A light rain had just ended. He sat down on one of the stones to wait, and because there was nothing to read and no one to speak to, he simply sat. He watched the rain finish dripping from the temple eaves, each drop finding the small puddle below it. He watched the dust of the courtyard, which the rain had settled, lying dark and still. Pigeons came down from the roof and walked about. The hour passed through him slowly, and somewhere inside it, without his deciding anything, the warehouse grew quiet in his head, and then the city grew quiet, and he was just a man sitting on a stone in a wet courtyard, present and unhurried. The people arrived. The teacher arrived. He stood at the front of the courtyard and opened with the same line he had opened with for 20 years. And the line went into the clerk like a stone going into deep water. He felt it sink. He felt it pass down through layer after layer of him, slowly, and come to rest somewhere at the very bottom, in a place the previous 20 hearings had never reached. He sat very still. Around him, people were settling and arranging themselves, hearing the line the way he had always heard it, as the familiar opening of a familiar talk. He could not have said, afterward, that he learned anything new that day. The teacher said what the teacher always said, but the clerk walked home a different man, and he knew it, and he knew exactly what had been different. It was the hour on the stone. The words had finally been given still water to land in. For the rest of his life, he kept one small custom. Wherever he went to hear anything that mattered, he arrived early and sat and let the water settle first. For 20 years, the clerk assumed the talks simply worked this way, pleasant and passing. The talks were full the whole time. He was the one who had no room. It is the same with most of what passes through us. When wise words fail to help us, we almost always blame the words and go looking for better ones. We change books, change teachers, gather more and more of the very thing that was never in short supply. The lake suggests the search is pointed the wrong way. One settled hour did for the clerk what 20 years of supply could not, because hearing and receiving are not the same act. Hearing happens in the ears. Receiving happens in the stillness behind them, and stillness was the one thing he had never brought. And the hour on the stone asked nothing special of him. He did not meditate on it, or prepare himself, or know that anything was happening at all. He sat in a wet courtyard with nowhere to be, and the settling did itself. It always does. The clerk's discovery was not a technique. It was simply the news that the room he had been trying to furnish with better and better words had been waiting all along for him to arrive in it. Here is another story. There was once a young scholar who traveled a long way to visit a hermit known for his understanding. The scholar had read everything in his city worth reading. He arrived at the hermit's hut in the hills with a satchel of notes and a head full of questions, and he began asking them almost before he had bowed. The hermit received him kindly, gave him water, and listened. The scholar asked about the nature of the mind, and then, before the hermit could draw breath, offered the 3 views he had read on the subject and the difficulties with each. He asked about stillness and supplied what the southern teachers said of it and what the mountain teachers said against them. Question after question went this way, each one followed at once by the scholar's own learning, so that by the time the sun moved off the doorstep, the hermit had spoken perhaps 10 words. The scholar stopped at last, a little out of breath. "Forgive me," he said. "I came all this way to learn from you, and I find I have done all the talking. Please, teach me something." The hermit considered him for a moment, then rose. "Come," he said. "Help me with the water." Behind the hut stood 2 rain barrels, set side by side under the eaves. The hermit lifted the lid from the first. The water inside was cloudy and grey, still turning slowly from its last use. "This one I wash from," he said. "The dipper goes in many times a day. It is good water, but you would not want to drink it." He lifted the lid from the second barrel. The water inside was so clear that the scholar could see the grain of the wood at the bottom and the evening sky lying on the surface, complete with its first star. "This one I drink from," the hermit said. "I take from it once in the morning, gently, and the rest of the day no one troubles it." The scholar looked from one barrel to the other. "But it is the same rain," he said. "The same rain," the hermit agreed. "The same barrels, from the same cooper, standing under the same roof. The only difference between them is how often they are stirred." The scholar stood looking into the clear barrel for a long time, at the sky resting on the water. He understood that he was being shown his own condition, and for once he did not say so. He did not say anything at all. That night, lying on the mat the hermit gave him, he slept poorly. His mind did what his mind always did, turning over the day, arranging what he would say about it, reaching for the next question. But now there was something new in the turning. He could feel it as turning. He lay in the dark and felt his own dipper going into the barrel, again and again, stirring, and for the first time in his learned life he wanted, more than any answer, simply to stop. He stayed 3 days with the hermit. He asked, in those 3 days, only 2 questions, and after each one he did something he had never done in his life. He waited. The hermit's answers were short, and they went into him as the evening had gone into the clear barrel, completely, with room to spare. When the scholar left, the hermit walked him to the edge of the trees, You came asking how to gain understanding, the old man said, which was true, although the scholar had never managed to ask it aloud. You have been gathering rain for years. There was never anything wrong with your rain. Stop stirring, and you will be able to drink it. The hermit's 2 barrels carry a teaching the Buddha placed close to the center of his path. In his language, it is called wise attention, and it names something we rarely think about, which is that attention has a quality, not just a direction. 2 people can attend to the same words, the same event, the same morning, and what it becomes inside them depends on the attention that received it. Stirred attention turns even wisdom into more noise. Settled attention turns even an ordinary sentence into nourishment. The Buddha taught that this receiving is itself a faculty, and that it can be cultivated like any other, which is much of what his path of practice is for. He had his own image for the settled mind, and it is close kin to our verse. He described a clear mountain pool, so still that a person standing on the bank can see everything in it. The pebbles, the sand, the fish, resting and moving. Nothing about the pool is hidden, he said, to one who stands quietly at its edge. A mind that has settled is like this. It does not need to be told what is true. It begins to see what is true, lying plainly in its own depths, the moment the stirring stops. And this is the thread our night keeps returning to. The clerk did not need a 21st year of talks, and the scholar did not need another satchel of notes. More was never the answer. What both of them needed was one still hour, one clear barrel, one quiet receiving. The wise in this verse own nothing the rest of us lack. They have simply stopped stirring what they already hold. For these next few moments, there is nothing to take hold of. You have been listening for a while now, and the listening has been doing its own work. Whatever in this hour was meant for you has already gone where it needed to go. It is sinking now, slowly, like a stone through deep water, and it does not need your help to land. Nothing true is ever lost on a settled mind. So there is no need to gather anything now. No need to review or to keep hold of the words. The lake keeps what falls into it. That is its nature, and tonight it is yours. Let the surface of the mind grow smooth, and the depths grow dark and easy. When you are ready, we will continue. Most people, looking back over an ordinary week, will find that their moods did a great deal of the steering. A wave of low spirits arrived on Tuesday, and the whole day bent around it. Some good news came on Thursday, and for an afternoon everything felt possible until the feeling faded and took the possibility with it. We rise and we dip day after day, lifted and lowered by weather that comes from inside us. There is a particular tiredness that comes from living this way, and most of us know it well, even if we have never named it. It is the tiredness of being a small boat on our own feelings, not the tiredness of the feelings themselves, the tiredness of being moved by every one of them, all day, for years. The Buddha knew this tiredness, and the chapter on the wise holds his answer to it. The verse describes a kind of person most of us have met once or twice in a life and never forgotten. Someone who clearly feels things and clearly is not tossed by them. The verse tells us what is actually happening inside such a person, and it is gentler and more available than it looks from the outside. The verse goes like this: Though touched by sadness or happiness, the wise appear neither depressed nor elated. The most important word in the verse is the quietest one: touched. The wise in this verse are not made of stone. The verse says plainly that sadness touches them and happiness touches them. They feel the loss when it comes. They feel the delight when it comes. Whatever picture we may carry of the sage who has risen above all feeling, this verse is not describing that person, and the Buddha never asked anyone to become that person. He spent his life among people, moved by their sorrows and glad in their joys. The wise feel everything the rest of us feel. What has changed in them is what happens in the moment after the feeling arrives. In most of us, that moment goes one particular way, so quickly that we never see it happen. A feeling arrives, and we become it. Sadness comes, and within a breath, it is no longer something we have. It is something we are. I am sad. And once I am sad, the whole world is viewed from inside the sadness. The morning looks grey through it. Old troubles look large through it. Decisions get made from inside it, and words get said from inside it, and by evening, the feeling has run the entire day from the driver's seat. Happiness does the same thing from the other side, which is harder to see, because no one complains about it. Good news arrives, and we become the good news, and we float, and we promise things, and we believe the float will last. Then it passes, as every feeling passes, and the passing itself becomes the next sadness. The wise have stopped making this one small move. The feeling arrives, and they let it remain a feeling. It is in them, fully felt, and it is not them. Sadness comes, and it is sadness visiting, not sadness governing. They have learned to be the sky their weather moves through, rather than becoming each cloud as it passes. The Buddha once said that of all the things in the world, he could find nothing that changes as quickly as the mind. Feelings, he taught, are the fastest moving things we will ever know. They arrive, swell, and fade, sometimes within minutes, always within days. And here is the strange mercy in that. A feeling allowed to be a feeling will finish on its own, every time. It is only when we become the feeling that it can last for years, because then we are no longer waiting for it to pass. We are holding it in place with our own identity. So the verse is not asking us to feel less. It is offering us something kinder. We are allowed to feel everything, and we do not have to be carried away by any of it. There is a story about this. There was once a young woman in a market town who earned her living reading and writing letters. Many people in the town could not read, and so they came to her small stall by the gate. They brought letters from sons working in the city, from daughters married into distant villages, from brothers traveling the trade roads. She read the letters aloud and wrote the replies, and in this way, the news of half the town passed through her voice. Some of the letters were bright. A betrothal agreed. A grandchild born. A son found steady work at last. And some were heavy. A harvest sold for less than it cost to grow. A homecoming put off for another year. A request that had to be refused. She was young, and she had a soft heart, and within her first season, she discovered that the letters did not stay at the stall. A bright letter would lift her, and she would float home on it, telling her family a stranger's good news as if it were her own. A heavy letter would settle into her and stay. She would carry someone else's poor harvest for days, her meals going dull under news that was not even hers. There were weeks when 3 heavy letters came in a row, and by the end of such a week she could hardly bring herself to break the next seal. She tried hardening herself, reading in a flat voice with her heart held back, and the customers felt it at once. The letters came out of her mouth, like goods being counted, and an old woman told her so, kindly, and asked for her granddaughter's letter to be read again, properly. So she gave up the hardening. But she did not know what else to do, and she began to believe she was not made for the work. In a town a half-day's walk away, there was an old letter writer who had kept her stall for 50 years. The young woman traveled there one market day, telling herself she was going to buy good paper, and spent the morning standing near the old woman's stall, watching her work. She watched the old woman read a heavy letter to a farmer and his wife. The news was a refusal they had clearly been waiting on for months. The old woman read it through, set the letter down, and took the wife's hand, and her own eyes were wet, and for a little while, the 3 of them simply sat with it together. Then the couple gathered themselves and thanked her and left. And then the young woman watched what the old letter writer did next, which was almost nothing. She wiped her pen slowly on its cloth. She squared the unused paper on the table. She sat for the space of a few breaths with her hands at rest, looking at nothing in particular. The whole of it took less than a minute. And when the next customer stepped up, a young man fairly bouncing with a letter about his new nephew, the old woman received him with her whole face, laughing at the good lines, making him read the baby's name twice. The morning sorrow was not hidden under the laughter. It was finished and had left room. Near midday, the young woman bought her paper and found the courage to ask. "The hard letters," she said, "don't they follow you home?" The old woman considered her and seemed to understand the whole question, including the parts that had not been asked. "They used to," she said. "I used to carry every letter in this town. Then I learned to let each one pass through me while it is here. I read it, I feel it, I let it finish. That is why it does not have to follow me." The young woman walked home with her paper, and what she had seen between the 2 customers went with her. She kept her stall for 40 more years. The letters never stopped coming, bright and heavy together, and she never stopped feeling them. But she had seen, in the space of a wiped pen and a few quiet breaths, that feeling a thing fully and being carried away by it are 2 different events, and that there is a small space between them where a person can stand. She spent her 40 years learning to stand there. In her old age, the town said of her what had been said of the old woman with the pen, that she was the steadiest soul at the gate and the most tender, and no one could work out how she managed to be both. No one could work it out because we are taught, almost from the beginning, that steadiness and tenderness pull against each other. To be steady, we think, is to feel less. To feel fully is to be at the mercy of what we feel. So we spend years choosing between our 2 halves, sealing over on the hard days and apologizing for ourselves on the soft ones, certain that a person must finally be one or the other. The old letter writer is proof against the whole arrangement. Her wet eyes over the farmer's letter were not the opposite of her steadiness. They were part of it. The feeling came, was given its full moment, and was allowed to finish. The minute with the pen and the cloth was not her recovering from the sorrow. It was her completing it so that she could turn to the next customer whole, with nothing trailing behind her and nothing pressed down inside her. What she never did was build a house inside the feeling and move in. That is the entire difference the verse is pointing at. Not less feeling, less residence. Let us explore another story. There was once a monk whose practice rose and fell with his moods, and had done so for years. On the bright mornings, when his sitting was clear and the teaching felt true, he was certain he would spend his life in the robes. On the heavy mornings, when his sitting was a fog and the bell seemed to ring only for him, he was certain the whole thing had been a mistake, and he would begin, privately, to plan his leaving. He had planned his leaving many times. He had never once left. In his 7th year, worn out by his own tides, he brought the matter to the old teacher of the monastery with some shame. "I think I lack the temperament for this life," he said. "Half the month I am sure of the path. The other half I am sure of nothing, and I make plans to go." The old teacher did not look alarmed. "How many times have you left us so far?" "None." "And how many times have you decided to?" The monk thought. "Hundreds." The teacher nodded slowly, as if the arithmetic pleased him. Then he gestured toward the open window, where the afternoon sky stood over the mountains, carrying a few slow clouds. "When the clouds come," he said, "what does the sky do?" The monk looked out the window. "Nothing," he said. "The clouds cross it. Does the sky become cloudy?" "The day becomes cloudy. The sky is where the clouds happen." "And when your heavy mood comes," the teacher said, "what do you do?" The monk was quiet for a while. "I become it," he said at last. "By the time I notice it has come, I am already inside it, packing my bag." The teacher smiled. "You answer better than most. Here is your practice for this year, and I want no other from you. When a mood arrives, bright or heavy, name it to yourself, once, the way a farmer names the weather from his doorway. Rain coming, clear spell. Then stay at your doorway and let it cross. Do not argue with it, do not obey it, and above all, make no plans inside it. Watch one whole mood arrive and finish from your doorway, and you will have learned more than I can teach you." The monk took up the practice. It was harder than it sounded. In the first weeks he would name the weather and be inside it a breath later anyway, halfway through his old plans before he remembered the doorway at all. He went back to the teacher to confess this, expecting correction, and the teacher only nodded and said, "Yes. The doorway is also learned slowly. Noticing you have left it is standing in it again." So he kept on, and it grew, slowly, easier. The moods did not stop coming. That was the first thing he learned, and the teacher had never promised they would. But somewhere in that year, the moment of becoming them began to loosen. A heavy morning would arrive, and he would name it from the doorway, "Heavy morning," and the strangest thing would happen, which is that there would now be two of him where there had always been one. The mood moving through, and the one at the doorway, watching it move, feeling all of it, and packing nothing. He stayed at that monastery his whole life. In his own old age, when young monks came to him ashamed of their tides, he would take them to the window. The sky over the mountains was usually carrying something. It always crossed. The teacher's instruction has deep roots. Equanimity is the Buddha's name for the quality the monk was learning at his doorway, and the place it holds in his teaching says everything about what it actually is. The Buddha named 4 qualities of heart so vast he called them the divine abidings: loving kindness, compassion, shared joy, and equanimity listed among the warmest words in the whole teaching. That placement is the correction most of us need. We hear equanimity and imagine distance, coolness, a polite remove from life. The Buddha placed it beside love, because in his understanding it is what makes love able to last. A heart with no steadiness in it burns through its warmth quickly. It loves until the first hard weather, and then it is swept off and must protect itself, and the protection slowly closes it. The old letter writer could be tender with every customer for 50 years because she was also the steadiest. The steadiness was not guarding her from her feelings. It was carrying them, all of them, the bright and the heavy alike, the way the sky carries its weather without once closing. This too belongs to the thread we have been following all night. The monk did not need 100 plans, and he did not need to win 100 arguments with his moods. He needed one doorway and the patience to stand in it. The wise in this verse have not conquered feeling. They have simply stopped moving house every time the weather changes. They live in one place now, deeper than the weather, and everything that comes is allowed to come, and everything that comes is allowed to pass. Whatever this day left in you, it can be here while you rest. If the evening holds some low feeling, it does not need to be fixed tonight, or solved, or even understood. It is weather, and it is already moving, even now, at its own slow pace. The sky holds clouds without any effort at all. Nothing is asked of it, and nothing is asked of you. And if the day left something bright in you, that can be here too, resting alongside everything else, without being held on to. Let the feelings be in the room, as the night is in the room. You are the place where they happen, and that place is deeper than all of them, and it is already at rest. Stay in that deeper place a while. When you are ready, we will continue. Most of us move through our days inside a soft cloud of politeness. People tell us our work is good. They tell us the meal was lovely, the decision was sensible, the years have been kind to us. We do the same for them. It is the ordinary courtesy of living among people, and there is real kindness in it, and almost no one would want a world without it. But somewhere in most lives, once or twice, something else happens. A person who cares about us says a true thing that costs them something to say. It is not flattering. It may sting for a day or for a season. And years later, when all the pleasant words have evaporated, that one true thing is still with us, and we find that we are grateful for it in a deeper place than we have ever been grateful for praise. The Buddha gave this experience a verse, and the verse makes one of the strangest comparisons in the whole Dhammapada. It takes the person who points out our faults, the person most of us instinctively brace against, and calls them something we would never think to call them. The verse goes like this: regard one who sees your faults as a guide to a hidden treasure. Stay close to one so wise, who corrects you when you need it. Things get better, not worse. A guide to a hidden treasure. Not a critic. Not a judge. Not an enemy to be managed or a voice to be endured. A guide walking beside us, pointing at ground we own and saying, dig there. The treasure in the verse is not the correction itself. No one enjoys the correction. The treasure is what the correction makes findable. Every person carries blind spots, and they are called blind spots for the simplest of reasons. We cannot see them. No amount of sincerity or self-reflection opens them, because the eye cannot look at itself. The habit everyone else has noticed, the small unfairness we repeat, the strength we lean on past its usefulness, these sit in plain view of everyone but us. And so a strange arrangement holds across every human life. The information we most need about ourselves is held entirely by other people. Most of those people will never give it to us. Not from malice, from kindness, or from caution, or because it is simply not their place. Politeness, which smooths so much of life, also quietly seals the blind spots shut. The friend who breaks that seal is doing something rare and expensive. They are risking the friendship itself to hand us a map to a room in our own house we did not know was there. The Buddha built this into the life of his own community, in a custom that still continues. At the end of every rains retreat, when the monks had lived closely together for months, each one, from the newest to the most senior, would invite the others openly. If you have seen anything in me, by deed or by word, that I should look at, tell me, out of compassion. Out of compassion. That was the spirit the whole custom rested on. The telling was understood as a gift, and the inviting of it was understood as a strength, and no one was above asking. There is a reason the verse says to stay close to such a person, and not merely to tolerate them. The same true words land entirely differently depending on who carries them. From a rival, a correction arrives as an attack, and everything in us rises to meet it. From someone who has proven, over years, that they want our good, the identical words arrive as care. The closeness is not incidental to the gift. The closeness is what makes the gift receivable. The verse also carries a quieter teaching on the receiving side. A guide can only lead someone who is willing to walk. Treasure cannot be handed to a person who is busy defending the door. Part of what the verse calls wisdom is simply this willingness, the small unclenching that lets a true word in to do its work. And the verse closes with a plain promise about where all this leads. Things get better, not worse. Not more wounded. Not more ashamed. Better. The fault, once seen, can finally be tended, and what was a flaw becomes a doorway. There was once a potter who was the most respected craftsman in his town. He had learned the wheel from his father, and people had been eating from his bowls and carrying water in his jars for 30 years. His standing was such that no one in the town would have dreamed of finding fault with his work. Somewhere in his 50s, something in his pots began to go quietly wrong. He could not have said what. The shapes were as good as ever, the glazes as handsome. But now and then a jar came back cracked that should not have cracked, and a bowl wore through its glaze in a year instead of 10. Each time, the customer apologized to him as if they had mishandled it and bought another and said nothing more. The town's respect formed a wall of pleasantness around him, and inside that wall, the floor went on, year after year. He sensed it. That was the hard part. He would stand in his workshop in the evenings with the feeling that something was drifting in his craft, and he would go over his clay and his wheel and his glazes and find nothing, because he was looking with the same eyes that had missed it in the first place. The feeling settled into him as a low, private discouragement. He began to wonder if it was simply age, and whether his best work was behind him. One morning, a farmer's wife appeared in his doorway with the pieces of a water jar gathered in her apron. She was a plain-spoken woman from an outlying village, and she did not know, or did not care, that no one found fault with the potter. "This cracked on its second use," she said, "and it is not the first of yours to do it. My mother had a jar of yours that lasted 20 years. Your pots used to ring when you tapped them. The new ones don't. I thought somebody ought to say it to you." She set the pieces on his bench, paid for nothing, bought nothing, and went on her way to the market. The potter stood in his workshop for a long while. The sting of it was real, and it lasted the rest of that day. But that evening, alone, he did what her words had made possible. He went down the shelf of his recent work, tapping each pot, and heard, for the first time, what she had heard. The dull note. Pot after pot, where there should have been a ring. The sound had been drifting for years, so slowly that his ear had drifted with it. The dull note gave him a thread, and the thread led him, over that winter, to the fault. It was in his kiln, in a repair he had made years before that had changed how the heat moved, so slightly that nothing looked wrong and everything fired a little short. He rebuilt it. The first jar out of the rebuilt kiln rang under his knuckle like a bell, and he stood in the workshop holding it, listening, with tears standing in his eyes. The following spring, when the new kiln had proven itself, he loaded a water jar onto his cart and drove out to the farmer's wife's village himself. He found her at her gate, set the jar in her arms, and tapped its shoulder with one knuckle so that she could hear it ring. She listened and nodded once, in the satisfied manner of a person whose words had been put to use, and that was all that ever passed between them about it. His last 10 years at the wheel were the finest of his life. People said his late pots surpassed even the ones his father had taught him on. And on the windowsill above his wheel, where the morning light fell, he kept a single curved shard from a broken water jar. Apprentices assumed it was from some masterpiece. He never corrected them. It was the piece of his work that had taught him the most, and the only one a friend had ever been brave enough to return. 30 years of compliments had told the potter nothing. The town honored him and watched his craft drift, and meant no harm by it, and nearly cost him his life's work. One plain sentence from a stranger in his doorway gave him back 10 years of mastery. The people who only ever agree with us are pleasant company and poor guides. They are not failing us out of unkindness. Agreement is easy to give and costs nothing, and so it flows toward us all our lives and tells us almost nothing because it would have flowed anyway. The farmer's wife gave the potter the other thing, the costly thing, and the verse's strange comparison came true in his workshop, exactly as written. The fault named became the treasure. The shard on the windowsill was his map, and he kept it where he could see it, in the light, above the work. Let us explore another story. In a mountain monastery, there lived 2 old monks who had entered as young men in the same season and had now been there together for 50 years. They had between them a custom that the younger monks knew about and did not fully understand. Once each year, in the first cold evening of autumn, the 2 of them took their tea together in the elder one's room, and each told the other one true thing he had seen in him that year that the other could not have seen in himself. The custom had been given to them by their own teacher when they were young, on the day he paired them. "You will live side by side for many years," he had told them. "Be mirrors for each other. A monk with one honest friend will go further than a monk with 100 agreeable ones." In the year this story tells of, The two were old men, and one of them had become a teacher of some renown, with visitors climbing the mountain to hear him. On the first cold evening of autumn, they sat with their tea, and the other monk, who had remained a simple gardener all his life, held his cup and was quiet for a while before he spoke. "This year I have seen something," he said. "When you teach now, some part of you is listening to how it sounds. You have begun to teach in order to be admired. It was not always so. I remember when you taught only to be useful." The room was silent. Outside, the first cold wind of the season moved through the pines. The famous monk looked into his tea for a long moment. "Thank you," he said at last. "I will look." That was all. They finished their tea speaking of other things, the garden, the coming winter, an old joke between them, and parted for the night as they always had. A young monk who had brought the tea had heard the whole exchange, and it troubled him for days. Finally, he went to the old gardener and asked him, "How could you say such a thing to him? And how could he bear to hear it? I should be wounded for a year." The old gardener considered the question. "When I was your age, I would have been wounded too," he said. "But we have done this every autumn for 50 years. 50 years of proof that the other man is digging for treasure and not throwing stones. After enough years of that, the sting goes out of it, and only the gift is left." The young monk later heard, as the whole monastery eventually did, what came of that evening. The famous teacher taught less the following year, and more slowly, and stopped accepting certain invitations, and those who knew his teaching best said it deepened in his last years into something none of his admirers had heard before. He never said publicly what had changed, but every autumn, on the first cold evening, the light in the elder's room burned late, 2 cups were set out, and the 2 old men kept their custom to the end of their lives. What the 2 monks had, the Buddha gave a name, and he ranked it higher than almost anything else in his teaching. It is called spiritual friendship. There is a moment in the old discourses when Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, comes to him glowing with an insight. "It seems to me," Ananda says, "that good friendship is half of the spiritual life." And the Buddha corrects him in one of the most quoted exchanges in the canon. "Not half, Ananda. Good friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. The whole of it. Not a comfort along the path, not a pleasant addition to the real work. The path itself. Because the friend who sees us clearly and stays and tells us the truth with kindness is doing for us the one thing that cannot be done alone. We can sit with ourselves for years and never find the blind spot, for the same reason the potter tapped his own pots for years and heard nothing. The eye cannot see itself. The honest friend is how a human being borrows another pair of eyes. And here the thread of our night runs through once more. 100 admirers told the famous teacher nothing in 50 years. One gardener with a teacup told him the thing that deepened his final decade. The verse never asks us to gather many such friends, and life rarely offers many. It speaks of one who sees, one who stays, one who says the true thing out of compassion. A person who has even one such friend in a lifetime is holding one of the treasures the verse is pointing at, and the other treasure is the one that friend keeps helping them find. There is nothing in you that needs examining now. The verse's work is not for this hour, and no fault needs finding tonight. But there may be a face that has come to mind in this last while. Someone, somewhere in your years, who told you a hard, true, kind thing. A teacher, a friend, a grandmother, a stranger in a doorway. At the time it may have stung. You may not have thanked them, then or ever. You can hold them in mind for a moment now, gently, with the gratitude that has had time to ripen. They were a guide. Whatever they helped you see, and whatever it made better, is part of you as you lie here. The treasure they pointed to may still be arriving, even now, in ways neither of you could have known. Let that gratitude be the last thing the day asks of you. When you are ready, we will continue. Every people on earth keeps stories of its great victories. The battles won, the champions, the records broken, the mountains climbed first. Children learn the stories young, and the lesson underneath them is learned even younger. Greatness, the stories say, is something that happens out loud, in front of others, against others, and the proof of it is that somebody lost. Most of us absorb this so early that we never think to question it. We carry private scoreboards all our lives, even those of us who would say we are not competitive at all. And the victories we admire, in ourselves and in others, are almost always the visible kind. The Buddha was once a prince of a warrior people. He grew up inside the stories of conquest, and he knew exactly what his world meant by victory. Which is what gives the verse we come to now its quiet force. In a single sentence, he took the greatest victory his listeners could imagine, set it on the scale, and weighed it against something no one had ever thought to put there. The verse goes like this: "The supreme conqueror is not the one who conquers a million others in battle, but the one who conquers a single person, themselves." The first surprise of the verse is the size of the claim. The Buddha is not saying that mastering yourself is also admirable, a small good thing alongside the great loud ones. He is saying it outranks them. The verse that follows this one goes further still. Every outer victory, it says, can be undone. Fortunes turn, records fall. What was won is lost again. But the person who has tamed themselves holds a victory that nothing can reverse. Not loss, not age, not the turning of any tide. It is the only winning, in all the kinds of winning there are, that cannot be taken back. The second surprise is gentler, and it is what the whole verse rests on. Conquering yourself does not mean what the word makes it sound like. It does not mean an inner war, a self divided into ruler and ruled, one half of you standing over the other with a whip. The Buddha knew that approach from the inside. Before his awakening, he spent 6 years in the harshest self-discipline of his time, starving and forcing himself, treating his own body and mind as enemies to be broken. It nearly killed him, and it brought him nothing, and he set it down completely. The path he taught afterward began with the lesson of those years. Force does not win this victory. Force is not even playing the right game. Most of us know the dragging well, even if we have never called it that. It is the difference between deciding to say something and hearing ourselves already saying it. Between choosing the second helping and finding the plate already full. Between meaning to let a remark go and discovering, an hour later, that we have been arguing with it the whole time. In all of these, no one forced us. And yet, in some honest sense, we were not the ones driving. To conquer yourself, in the Buddha's sense, is simply to no longer be dragged. Not dragged by the flare of temper that decides your words before you do. Not dragged by the craving that walks you to the cupboard, the worry that walks you in circles, the old reflexes that answer for you in the old ways. The conquered self is not a defeated self, sullen and suppressed. It is more like a household that has finally come to peace with itself. Everything still lives there. Nothing runs the place by force anymore. And this is why the victory is so quiet. The outer kind of winning needs a witness, a field, an opponent, a score. This kind happens in a kitchen, on a cushion, in a pause that nobody sees, and there is no one on the losing side at all. Here is a story about this. There was once a woman who had carried a temper all her life. It was a family fact about her, as some people are famous in their families for their bread or their singing. Her angers were small storms, quickly come and quickly gone, a raised voice, a hard word, a door shut too firmly. They never lasted long. The regret lasted much longer. She spent far more of her life regretting the storms than having them, and after each one, she would resolve, sincerely, to be done with them. She had been making that resolution for 50 years. The family had a saying about it that they kept from her, kindly. In her 60s, her son's family came to live nearby, and her small granddaughter became the companion of her days. The girl shelled peas with her, followed her in the garden, fell asleep against her arm. One afternoon, something in the kitchen went wrong. A spill, a broken dish, the small last straw of a tiring day, and the old storm rose in her, and her voice rose with it. It was nothing by the measure of her lifetime. A single sharp sentence. But she happened to be looking at her granddaughter when it left her, and she saw the child flinch. She finished the afternoon quietly. She said nothing about it to anyone. That evening, when the house had emptied and she was alone, she sat down at her kitchen table. She did not plan what happened next, and she could never afterward explain why it happened on that night, and not on any of the 10,000 nights before. She laid her hand flat on the cool wood of the table, and she let herself remember the flinch, and the old storm began to rise again, this time at herself. And she watched it. She did not argue with it, and she did not obey it, and she did not get up from the chair. She sat with her hand on the table and felt the anger arrive in her chest, felt it climb, felt it crest, like a wave that fully intended to carry her off, as it always had, and she stayed exactly where she was, breathing, her hand on the wood. And the wave, finding no one willing to be carried, slowed, and stood, and came down on its own, going out of her by the same door it had come in, leaving her sitting in her own kitchen in the lamplight, still breathing, still there. The whole of it took perhaps 2 minutes. No one saw it. There was nothing to see. A woman alone at a table with her hand on the wood. It was, though she would never have used such words, the largest victory of her life. The temper did not vanish that night. It rose again many times in the years that followed, and on some evenings she went back to the table on purpose, and laid her hand on the wood, and sat with whatever had risen until it had finished rising. The table became, without anyone knowing it, the most important furniture in the house. But something had changed on that first night, and stayed changed. She had learned that she could be present for the whole life of a wave without becoming it, and each time she did, the waves came smaller and arrived less often and left more quickly. Her granddaughter, who grew up alongside those years, knew her as the gentlest of the family's elders and never quite believed the older stories. The fire was still in her somewhere, her children said, but it lived in her now like a fire in a fireplace, warm, contained, and harming no one. No one saw the woman's greatest accomplishment. There was no field, no opponent, no cheering. It happened alone at a kitchen table on an ordinary evening, and it produced nothing visible at all, and it changed the remaining decades of a family's life. The world keeps careful score of the loud victories, and no score whatsoever of these. There is no record book for the storm that crested and was not obeyed, the sharp reply that rose and was not spoken, the old reflex that reached for the wheel and was gently refused. These winds are invisible by their very nature, because what they look like from the outside is nothing happening. A person sitting still. And yet everyone in the orbit of such a person lives partly on the proceeds. The verse is one of the only places in all the words humans have kept where these silent victories are given their true rank. Supreme, it says, above the conquest of 1,000,000. There was once a man who had been a soldier for half his life before he became a monk. He had been good at soldiering, decorated and known, and he came to the monastery in his middle years for reasons he did not fully explain, and took to the robes with the same determination he had brought to everything. But by the end of his first year, he was restless, and he brought his trouble to the abbot honestly. "I was good at something once," he said. "I am not good at this. I sit, and my mind runs. I chant, and my thoughts are elsewhere. There is nothing here to be good at. Forgive me, but I miss having something to win." The abbot, an old man who had heard many confessions, seemed to find nothing alarming in this one. "What were you good at in your old life?" The soldier thought about how to say it. "Winning," he said. "Whatever was in front of me." The abbot nodded slowly, and then gave him his assignment, and it was not at all what the soldier expected. "From tomorrow," the abbot said, "you will ring the dawn bell. Every morning, before first light. That is all. Ring it well, and we will speak again." The soldier waited for the rest of the assignment. There was no rest of it. He left the abbot's room half insulted. The dawn bell was a novice's task, the smallest duty in the monastery. He had commanded men. Now he was to be a bell ringer. He rang the bell the next morning and the morning after. The first winter taught him the true shape of the task. Each morning, in the dark, a voice in him opened negotiations. It was eloquent. It spoke of the cold, of his years, of how little one late bell could matter, of how much he had already given in his life, and how small a thing it was to ask for one warm hour. He came to know that voice better than he had known any adversary in his old career. Within a month he understood, dimly, why the task had been given to him, and within a year he understood it completely, and it was the hardest thing he had ever been asked to do. There was no enemy in it. That was the heart of the matter. Every difficult thing he had done in his old life had come with an opponent, a stake, an audience, a reward, and all of those had carried him. The bell came with nothing. Only the cold dark, the warm bed, and the man who wanted to stay in it. No one would have known if he rang it late. No one praised him when he rang it on time. Morning after morning, year after year, the entire campaign was one man rising in the dark for no reason except that he had said he would. He rang the dawn bell for 20 years. He rose through no ranks and won no renown, and the monastery simply came to know that the bell was never late, in any season, in any weather, and that something about the old soldier had gone very still and very deep. Late in his life, a visitor who had heard pieces of his history asked him the question travelers like to ask. "You have lived 2 whole lives," the visitor said. Tell me, what was the hardest campaign you ever fought? The old monk laughed, and his answer became one of the stories the monastery kept. The bell, he said. 20 years of mornings against one opponent. The man who wanted to stay in bed. He considered, looking out at the mountains. Although opponent is no longer the word, that man and I are friends now. It took 20 years, and it was worth more than everything I won before. The abbot's gift to the soldier was the same gift the Buddha left in this verse. He took a man whose whole greatness had depended on opponents and gave him a task with no opponent in it, because that is the only ground where this kind of victory can be won. The Buddha came to that ground himself by long trial, and the teaching he drew from it is named in every account of his life. He called it the middle way. There is an old exchange in the discourses where he teaches it to a young monk who had been a musician before ordaining, and who was driving himself so hard in practice that he was ready to give up entirely. The Buddha asked him about his old instrument. When the strings were wound too tight, what happened? They snapped, the monk said. And too slack? No music at all. Just so, the Buddha told him. Tune your effort like a string. Not the snap of force, not the slackness of giving up. The mastery this verse calls supreme is won at that middle tension, and at no other, which is why all the years of harshness, his own included, had won nothing. And there is one more thing about this victory. The kindest fact of all. It is the only conquest in the world with no loser. The conquest of 1,000,000 leaves 1,000,000 grieving. The conquest of oneself leaves a grandmother gentler at her table, a bell that the whole monastery trusts in the dark, a household, a village, a family living partly on the peace of it. Everyone near a self-mastered person wins along with them. The verse calls such a person the supreme conqueror, and they are the only conqueror in history who has never cost anyone anything. The day's efforts are finished now, and nothing in you needs conquering tonight. If something is restless as you lie here, some worry still pacing, some feeling not yet settled, it is not an opponent, and tonight is not a campaign. The woman at the table did not defeat her wave. She kept it company until it finished. You can keep company with whatever is here in the same easy manner, your hand resting wherever it rests, asking nothing to leave. The bell ringer's victory was made of mornings, but it was kept, all those years, by nights, exactly like this one. Rest was part of his practice too, and it is the only part being asked of you now. Let everything in you stand down together. When you are ready, we will continue. There are a few people, in most lives, whose company is restful in a manner no one can quite explain. They are not always wise in any showy sense. They may say very little, but something in a room changes when they are in it. Voices lower a little. Shoulders come down. Problems that felt urgent an hour ago seem to find their right size. And when we leave their company, we often feel we have received something, though nothing was given that we could name. Most of us have wondered, at some point, what such people have. We tend to guess at the surface. A gentle voice, perhaps. Good manners. A calm face. But plenty of people have gentle voices and calm faces and give us nothing at all, and we can feel the difference within minutes, even if we cannot say what we are feeling. Tonight we have been reading from 2 neighboring chapters of the Dhammapada. Between them, in the book itself, sits a short chapter describing the person this whole path produces. One verse from that chapter belongs in our night because it answers exactly this question. It tells us what those restful people have and where it lives and in which direction it moves. The verse goes like this: "Their mind is peaceful. Peaceful are their speech and deeds. Such a one is at peace, set free by understanding." The order of the words is the teaching. Mind first, then speech, then deeds. Peace, in this verse, is something that moves outward. It begins in the one place no one else can see, and it spreads from there into the voice, and from the voice into the hands, and from the hands into the day. By the time it reaches the surface, where other people meet it, it is already old. It has traveled the whole distance from the center, and that journey is what people feel in the room. The very first verse of the whole Dhammapada says the same thing in its own words. Everything begins in the mind, it says. The mind comes first, and what we say and do follows after, as the cart follows the ox. Most of us, when we want to be peaceful, work in the opposite direction. We start at the surface, because the surface is what we can control. We make the voice calm while the mind is churning. We hold the face still over a racing heart. We move gently through a room while arguing furiously inside. This is not dishonest, and it is often the kindest thing available to us on a hard day. But it is assembly, not peace, and other people can feel the difference even when they cannot name it. Calm that is performed sits on a person. Calm that has traveled outward from a settled mind comes off a person, and the room receives it without being asked. The verse is describing someone in whom the seam is gone. There is no longer an inside saying one thing and an outside doing another. What is in the mind is what is in the voice, is what is in the hands. The old word for this is integrity, which at its root simply means being one piece. And the verse names where such wholeness comes from. Not from discipline at the surface, and not from a fortunate temperament, but from understanding. Such a person has seen something about how things are, deeply enough that the inner argument has ended. The peace is what is left when the argument ends. Everything after that is just the peace arriving at the surface. Here is a story about this. There was once a large roadside inn whose kitchen fed travelers from early morning until late at night. It was a difficult kitchen, as busy kitchens are. Orders came in waves, the fire had moods, and on most evenings the room ran on shouting and a kind of controlled panic that everyone there had come to accept as the nature of the work. Everyone except one of the cooks. She was an older woman who had worked there longer than anyone, and the strange fact about her, known to the whole inn but understood by no one, was this. On the evenings, she ran the kitchen. The kitchen was a different room. The same orders came in waves. The same fire had the same moods, and yet the shouting died down, the panic never quite formed, and the work, which on other nights felt like a battle, went by like strong rowing, hard and steady and together. The serving girls fought to work her shifts. Nobody could say why. She gave no speeches and made no rules. She mostly stood at her station and cooked. A young cook joined the kitchen one spring, a capable girl who lived, as many capable people do, in a state of constant low alarm. She burned her hands hurrying, dropped things hurrying, lay awake at night going over the evening's near disasters. She noticed within her first week what everyone noticed about the old cook's shifts, and being practical, she decided to learn the method. She watched the old woman for a month. She wrote down how she organized her station, when she started her sources, how she called her orders. She copied all of it exactly, and none of it made any difference, because none of it was the method. Then came a feast night at the end of summer, the inn full past full, and in the worst hour of it a boy carrying a loaded platter slipped, and the platter went down with a crash that stopped the whole kitchen like a held breath. A dozen plates of work, gone, with the dining room full and waiting. Every face in the kitchen turned, and the young cook felt the room balance on the edge of its own panic, ready to tip. The old cook looked over at the wreckage, and at the stricken boy standing in it. "Nobody is hurt," she said. "That is the only part that could not be cooked again." She turned back to her pans. "Bring me the orders that were on it." That was all. The young cook stood watching what happened next, and it was the closest thing to a teaching she ever received in that kitchen. The room came down off its edge. The boy breathed and knelt and cleared the floor. The orders were called again. The wave of work closed over the crash and rolled on, and within minutes, the only remaining sign of disaster was a wet patch of floor. The panic had arrived, found nowhere to land, and left. Once, early in her copying month, the young cook had asked her directly, "What is your secret? You must tell me. I have watched everything you do." The old woman had thought about it honestly, stirring, and given the only answer she had. "When I was your age, I cooked 2 dinners every night. The one in the pans and the one in my head, where everything was already going wrong. One evening I was too tired for both, so I let the second one go. The food has been better since. So have I." The young cook had written it down with her other notes and not understood it, because it did not look like a method. She understood it on the feast night. She had been studying the wrong thing all month. The station, the timing, the calling of orders, these were just the visible edges of the woman. What ran the kitchen on her shifts was further in than any of it, in a place a notebook could not reach. The kitchen was calm because the old cook was calm, all the time, at the center, and 40 people a night were warming themselves at it without knowing it had a source. She worked beside the old woman for 6 more years, and stopped taking notes, and slowly stopped hurrying, and many years later, in a kitchen of her own, the serving girls fought to work her shifts, and nobody could say why. A room takes its weather from the steadiest person in it. This is something everyone knows from the inside and almost no one says out loud. Agitation is contagious, and we all know that part well. One anxious voice and the meeting tightens, one slammed door and the whole house walks carefully. But the contagion runs the other way too, and it runs stronger. The old cook never asked the kitchen to be calm. She did not manage anyone's panic or instruct anyone's breathing. She simply declined, night after night, to add her own weather to the room, and a room where the steadiest person adds, nothing has a place to settle. And we have all stood on both sides of this without knowing it. We have walked into rooms and felt our own weather change inside a minute, for better or for worse, and never asked where the change came from. And we have been, on our own settled days, the person someone else's shoulders came down near, and never known we were giving anything at all. That is what the people at the start of this module have, the restful ones whose company we could never explain. They are not doing something to us. They have stopped doing something, somewhere inside, and we can feel the stillness of it from across a table, from across a kitchen, sometimes from across a courtyard. Let us explore another story. There was once a man who traveled a great distance to visit a monastery whose teacher was spoken of across the whole region. He arrived at midday, tired and full of anticipation, and at the gate he found an old monk sweeping the flagstones of the courtyard. "I have come to see the master," the traveler said. "Where can he be found?" The old monk leaned on his broom and considered the question. "Teaching happens in the great hall," he said, "in the evening, after the meal. Anyone may sit." And he went back to his sweeping. The traveler attended the evening teaching. A senior monk spoke, learned and impressive, but the traveler had heard learned men before, and he left the hall uncertain whether he had yet seen the famous teacher at all. He decided to stay a few days and find out. The days passed strangely. The monastery was pleasant but ordinary, and the traveler began to suspect the teacher's renown was the usual exaggeration of distance. And yet he noticed something he could not account for. Several times each day, his path crossed the old sweeper's. He found him mending a step, or carrying water, or sweeping the long walk under the pines. They rarely spoke beyond a greeting, but the traveler found himself arranging his walks, without quite admitting it, so that they passed the places the old man worked. He felt better near him. His thoughts, which had been loud his whole journey, went quiet in that stretch of courtyard, and he had taken to lingering there with invented purposes, the way one lingers in a patch of sun. On the fourth day, he asked a young monk, half in frustration, "I have been here 4 days. Where is this famous teacher of yours? Which one is he?" The young monk looked at him with surprise and pointed across the courtyard at the old man with the broom. The traveler stood for a long moment. Then he crossed the courtyard, and the old monk stopped sweeping and waited for him kindly. "You knew what I came for," the traveler said. "Why did you not tell me it was you?" "You did not ask about me," the old monk said. "You asked whether teaching could be found. But you found it anyway, I think. You have been standing in this courtyard for 4 days. The traveler began to laugh, at himself mostly. "I expected something else," he admitted. "Robes. A high seat. I walked past you on the first day." The old monk nodded, without any offense, and took up his broom again. "Everyone walks past it on the first day," he said. "Peace looks like an old man sweeping. It has never looked like much. That is how it stays so well hidden out here in the open." In the Buddha's description of the path, what we think, what we say, and what we do are not 3 separate projects. He taught them as one training. A person could not truly settle the mind, he said, while their speech ran careless and their actions ran rough, and no amount of polished speech and correct action could substitute for a mind still at war. The 3 rise together, slowly, over years, like one water level, in 3 connected pools. And the verse's portrait, peaceful mind, peaceful speech, peaceful deeds, is simply what the pools look like when the level is high. And the Buddha taught one more thing about this peace in an image from the flowers chapter of this same book. The scent of blossoms, he said, cannot travel against the wind. Sandalwood, jasmine, none of them. But the fragrance of a good person travels even against the wind and reaches everywhere. He meant what the inn's kitchen knew and what the traveler discovered in the courtyard. A settled person cannot be contained by their own skin. The peace moves outward whether they intend it or not, into rooms, into households, into anyone standing nearby, the one fragrance in the world that no wind can refuse. Through this whole night, the verses have kept choosing the small thing over the many. One word over 1,000. One day over 100 years. And here at the edge of the night, the teaching says it in its quietest voice yet. One settled person in a kitchen of 40 was enough. One old man with a broom changed every crossing of a courtyard. It has never taken many. There is one more thing the verse offers, and it is for right now. The settling you have been doing through these hours is not only yours. Whatever grows a little more peaceful in you tonight will be in your voice tomorrow, and in your hands, and in the rooms you enter, without your planning any of it. The people in your life receive the person you become while resting. This is the verse's quiet promise that no peace is ever private for long. So let yourself settle the rest of the way down, not as a task, but as water settles when the day stops stirring it. Mind first. The rest follows on its own. When you are ready, we will continue. The Dhammapada holds 423 verses. They speak of almost everything a human life contains, and most of them could be read at any hour of any day. But there is one verse among them that seems to have been written for this hour in particular, for the end of a long day, for a person who has spent an evening in the company of old and gentle words and is close now to rest. It comes from the chapter on the wise, and of everything that chapter says about wisdom, this verse may be the most surprising, because it does not speak of insight, or learning, or great attainments. It speaks of something far more ordinary, and far more wished for. It speaks of resting easily. The verse goes like this: "Through joy in the teaching you sleep at ease, with a clear and confident heart." The wise always delight in the teaching. The verse draws a straight line that almost no one expects. From joy in the teaching, it says, to sleeping at ease. Not from solving one's problems to sleeping at ease. Not from finishing the work, or winning the argument, or securing the future, or finally getting the answer. We tend to believe rest must be earned that way, which is why so many of us lie down each night still working, going over the unsolved things, holding the day open long after it is closed. The verse offers a different doorway entirely. It says that ease of heart comes from where the heart has been spending its time. A heart that has been dwelling in wisdom, even for an hour, grows clear, and a clear heart rests, whether or not a single problem was solved. The word joy is doing quiet work here too. The verse does not say through duty in the teaching or through discipline in the teaching. It says joy. The teaching, in this verse, is not medicine to be endured for our own good. It is closer to water for a thirsty person, and the wise are simply the ones who have learned where the well is and go there gladly and drink. There is an old account from the Buddha's own life that says all of this in a single scene. One winter, a young prince came upon the Buddha resting outdoors, on rough ground, on a thin mat of leaves, with the cold wind moving through the trees. The prince was troubled by the sight and asked him, "Sir, did you sleep well?" And the Buddha answered that he had slept very well indeed, that he was one of those in all the world who sleep at ease. The prince looked at the frozen ground and the thin mat and asked how that could possibly be. And the Buddha told him that ease does not come from the bed. The ones who rest badly on soft beds, he said, are kept awake by what they carry, by wanting and worry and the heat of old angers. He was not carrying those anymore. And a person carrying nothing sleeps well anywhere. That is the clear and confident heart the verse describes. Clear, because nothing is churning it. Confident, not in the sense of certainty about tomorrow, but in the older sense of trust. A heart that trusts it can set the day down, and that the world will keep until morning. There is a story about this. There was once a woman who kept an inn on a busy trade road, and the private joke of her life, which she found less funny with each passing year, was that everyone slept well under her roof except her. Travelers came in worn from the road, ate her cooking, climbed to her clean rooms, and slept like stones. She, in the small room behind the kitchen, lay awake. Her mind kept the accounts at night. It counted what the wine had cost and what the carters had paid, went over the leak in the stable roof, rehearsed tomorrow's market, worried the season ahead. She had tried the usual remedies over the years. Warm milk, earlier nights, a neighbor's herbs, counting backward from large numbers. Each one worked for a week, the way new shoes feel fine in the shop, and then the accounts found their way around it, and she was awake again. The inn prospered. Its keeper lay in the dark beside her ledgers, eyes open, every night for years. One autumn, an old traveling teacher took a room for a week. He was a quiet guest, and in the evenings, when the meal was cleared, he would sit by the fire, and the travelers would gather, and he would offer one short teaching, never long, and then sit with them in easy talk until the candles burned down. The innkeeper heard these evenings from behind her counter, in pieces between tasks. She was not listening as she would have said it. She was working. But a fire-lit room carries a voice well, and the teachings were short, and they found her where she stood. On the third evening, drying cups behind the counter, she noticed something strange, and the strangeness of it made her stop with the cloth in her hand. Her mind was quiet. The accounts, which ran behind everything she did from waking to sleeping, had stopped running. She checked, in the half-comic manner of a person patting their pockets, and found the worries all still there. The stable roof, the season ahead, none of them solved. But they were sitting down, somehow. For the better part of an hour, while her hands worked, her heart had been resting inside the old man's words, and she had not even noticed herself doing it. That night she slept, simply and completely, as her guest slept. She was almost angry about it in the morning, that it could be that near. The teacher moved on at the week's end, as travelers do. But she had seen what the evenings had done, and she was a practical woman, so she kept the part of it she could keep. Each night, when the inn quieted, she gave the last hour of her day to the same kind of company. A page of an old book of sayings a traveler had left behind. Sometimes only a few lines, read slowly by the last of the fire. The accounts still tried to run at night. They never fully stopped trying. But the last thing her heart held each day was no longer the ledger, and it changed what the nights were. Rest, which had been so costly for so many years, began arriving on its own, like a guest who knows the door. The innkeeper did not solve a single one of her problems that week. The stable roof leaked on, the season stayed uncertain, and the figures in the ledger did not move. By every measure she had been using for years, nothing changed, and everything changed, because she had been using the wrong measure. She had believed rest stood at the end of the finished work, and the work, like all real work, was never finished, so the rest never came. What the firelit evenings taught her is exactly the verse's straight line. How we rest depends less on what we have solved than on what we are holding when we stop. Her hands had been full of cups, and her heart, for once, had been holding one clear and gentle thing instead of 40 open accounts. That is the entire mechanism the verse describes, and it is almost embarrassingly available. It asks only this: that the heart be given something worth holding near the day's end, and be allowed to hold it. There was once a small monastery in the hills that had, among the monasteries of its region, a peculiar reputation. Its monks slept well. This was spoken of half admiringly and half as an accusation, especially by a neighboring monastery known for its severity, where the monks kept long vigils and short nights and considered tiredness a form of progress. Travelers carried the gossip up and down the valley. The monks on the one hill were iron. The monks on the other hill, it was said, went to their rest early and got up looking rested, and surely such ease must hide some laxness. One year a senior monk from a distant region, a stern and honest man, decided to see for himself and arranged to stay a month. His first nights there unsettled him more than any austerity could have. He lay in the guest cell listening for the sounds he knew, the creak of pacing, the small hours' lamplight under doors, the coughs of tired men, and heard none of it. The whole hillside simply rested, the buildings dark and breathing, and he lay awake in the middle of it, out of long habit, feeling like the one lit window in a sleeping town. By day, he went looking for the laxness he had come to find. He arrived expecting comfort and found none in particular. The food was plain, the work was steady, the sitting practice was long and exact. He inspected everything with a visitor's sharp eye and found nothing lax anywhere, which only deepened the puzzle. The monks were not soft, and yet there was an ease over the whole place that he could not locate the source of, and the nights were the quietest he had ever known in a monastery, with none of the lamplit pacing and small hours' restlessness he knew so well from home. It was almost the end of his month before he understood, and what finally showed him was the most ordinary thing in the monastery's day. Each night, after the last meal, the whole community gathered in the hall for what he had taken, at first, to be a brief formality. One monk, a different one each night, would recite a single verse from the old books. One verse only. Then the community sat with it in silence, no longer than it takes a pot of tea to cool. Then the bell, and everyone went to their rest. On his last evening, he sat with the old abbot and confessed both his errand and his confusion. "I came to find the laxness," he said. "There is none. Your discipline is as sound as ours, and yet your monks sleep like children while mine wear paths in the floorboards. I have watched everything you do for a month. What am I failing to see?" "You have seen it every night," the abbot said. "You sat in it an hour ago." The visitor thought. "The verse? The single verse before rest?" He shook his head. "We recite 10 times as much before our vigils." "So did my teacher's generation," said the abbot. "Recitation upon recitation, and then vigils on top of them. And do you know what a heart does with so much? The same thing a traveler does with too much baggage. It carries it about, arranging it, all night long." He poured the tea. "We give the heart one clear thing to hold, and then we let it lie down. A heart holding one clear thing rests. A heart holding everything does not. That is the whole of our famous secret. I am sorry it is so small." The visitor was quiet for a long while. "And it is enough," he said. "One verse." "It was always enough," the abbot said. "The books themselves say so. One saying, 'Hearing which brings you peace.'" The visitor went home when the month ended. He changed nothing about his monastery's discipline, which was sound. But that winter, a new custom appeared in its evening hall, small and unannounced. One verse, a short silence, the bell. Within a few years, travelers in the valley had a new piece of gossip, which was that nobody could tell the two monasteries apart anymore by their nights, and the old accusation was never spoken again, because there was no longer anyone awake to repeat it. The abbot's secret has been hiding in the open since the beginning of this night, because his one clear thing and our first verse are the same teaching wearing different robes. Better than 1,000 sayings, the chapter of the thousands, told us at the start of the evening, is the single saying that brings peace. The abbot built a monastery's nights on that one line, and without naming it, this whole night has been built the same shape. Verse by verse, one at a time, each given room to land, with silence after. The Buddha described what happens in a heart treated this kindly, and he described it as a sequence, almost as a natural law. Gladness arises first, he said, the simple gladness of being near something true. Gladness ripens into joy. Joy calms the body, all on its own, without instruction. The calmed body feels ease, and ease settles into stillness. 5 steps, each one giving rise to the next the way warmth rises from a fire, with no forcing anywhere in the chain. This is why the verse can draw its straight line from delight in the teaching to resting at ease. It is not a hope or a poem. It is a plain description of how the heart works, and it has been quietly at work in you for some hours now. The wise always delight in the teaching, the verse ends. Of all the portraits of wisdom this chapter has offered tonight, the craftsman, the deep lake, the honest friend, the quiet victor, this last one may be the easiest to mistake for nothing. The wise are the ones who keep returning, gladly, to the words that bring them peace. Tonight, that portrait has included you. There is nothing left to do. The sequence the Buddha described is already running and has been running all evening. The gladness has had its hours. The body has been calming itself through every story and every silence without being asked. What remains is only the last step, and it asks nothing of you at all. It completes itself. Whatever the day left unfinished will keep until morning. It always has. The world is very old, and it knows how to hold things overnight. Let the heart hold one clear thing, or nothing at all. Both are enough now. When you are ready, we will continue. Our night with the 2 chapters is complete. 9 verses, each one given its own hour, each one saying the same gentle thing in a different voice. That what matters in a life is never the quantity. It is the single near thing received completely. Let us gather, one last time, what the verses have said. Better than 1,000 meaningless sayings, the first verse told us, is a single, meaningful saying, hearing which brings you peace. Of all the words that pass through a day, only the ones that land in stillness ever stay. One sentence, said with full attention at the right moment, can outweigh years of talk, and most of us are carrying such a sentence right now, given to us long ago, still doing its work. irrigators guide water, fletchers straighten arrows, carpenters carve timber, and the wise tame themselves, not by force, which the material of a life only resists, but by patience, by knowledge of the grain, by returning. We are workable. Whatever we are now is not the final shape. It is the material. Better to live a single day seeing rise and fall than 100 years blind to it. The worth of our time was never in its length. It was in how much of us was present while it passed. And the door this verse opens is never closed, because one fully seen day counts completely whenever in a life it arrives. Even this late in the evening. Even now. The wise, when they hear the teachings, are like a deep lake, clear and unclouded. The words that change us are not better words. They are the same words, finally given still water to land in. We never needed a greater supply of wisdom. We needed to stop stirring what we already hold. Though touched by sadness or happiness, the wise are neither swept low nor carried away. They feel everything. They have simply stopped becoming each feeling as it passes, and have learned to be the sky their weather moves through. Less residence, not less feeling. We are allowed all of it, and we do not have to be carried off by any of it. The one who sees our faults, the verses said, is a guide to a hidden treasure. The eye cannot see itself, and so the truest information about us is held entirely by the people who love us. One honest friend, over a lifetime, gives us what 100 agreeable ones never can. If we have even one, we are wealthy. The supreme conqueror is not the one who defeats 1,000,000 others, but the one who comes to peace with a single person, themselves. It is the quietest victory there is, one at kitchen tables and dawn bells where no one is watching, and it is the only victory in the world that costs no one anything and cannot be taken away. A peaceful mind makes peaceful speech and peaceful deeds. Peace moves outward, from the one place no one can see, into every room we enter, and it cannot be contained by our own skin. It is the one fragrance that travels against the wind. No peace we make in ourselves is ever private for long. And through joy in the teaching, the last verse promised, we rest at ease, with a clear and confident heart. How we rest was never decided by what we had solved. It was decided by what we were holding when we stopped. A heart holding one clear thing rests. A heart holding everything does not. 9 verses, and really only one. Each hour of our night held the same small teaching up to a different light. The word, the day, the lake, the friend, the bell, each was a new doorway into the one house. The chapter called The Thousands was never about thousands. It was written to walk us, gently, past all of them, and set us down in front of the one. Imagine, for a moment, an old lamplighter at dusk, beginning his round through the streets of a small town. He carries his pole with its little flame, and the evening is coming down, and there are 100 lamps on his route. He does not think about the 100 lamps. He stopped thinking about them many years ago, in his first tired season, when the counting nearly drove him from the work. He lights the lamp in front of him. That is the whole of his craft. He sets the flame to the wick, waits for it to take, watches it steady itself against the dark. Then he walks to the next one. One lamp, one small flame, one moment of light taking hold. Then the next. People at their windows see him pass and think his work must be dull. The same small act repeated down every street, every evening, year upon year. He knows something they do not. The work is not repeated at all. Each lamp is its own lamp. Each wick takes the flame in its own time. Each small light steadies itself differently against its own patch of evening, and he is there for every one of them, the only person in town who is. At the end of his round, at the top of the hill where the route finishes, he turns and looks back, as he always does. And there is the whole town below him, lit. Streets of light crossing and joining, the great glowing shape of it laid out in the dark. It looks, from the hill, like one vast act. He knows it was nothing of the kind. It was one lamp, attended completely, 100 times. The whole light of the town was made the small way. There is no other way it has ever been made. He was not always this way. In his first seasons, the counting nearly finished him. He would stand at the third lamp already thinking of the 60th, hurrying each flame so he could hurry to the next, and the route felt endless, precisely because he was carrying all of it at every step. He came home those nights more worn by the 100 lamps in his head than by the 100 in the streets. What changed him was a fog. One autumn evening, a fog came off the river so thick that he could see only the lamp in front of him. The rest of the route, the whole long count of it, had simply vanished. There was nothing to hurry toward, because there was nothing visible to hurry toward. So he lit the one lamp the fog allowed him, slowly, for once watching the flame actually take. Then he walked on, and the fog opened just far enough to offer him the next one. Lamp by lamp, the route gave itself to him that way, one small pool of light at a time, and he arrived at the top of the hill that night calm in a manner he did not recognize, and stood there a long while, understanding something. The fog had not changed his work. It had shown him his work. It had only ever been one lamp. The 100 had always lived in his head, and nowhere else. The town, over the years, came to set its evenings by him. Children watched from windows for the small flame moving up the street. People said the lamplight felt different on his route than in the neighboring towns, warmer somehow, though it was the same oil and the same glass everywhere. They were not wrong. Every lamp in his town had been lit by someone who was entirely there when he lit it. 100 small moments of full attention strung down every street, every evening, for 40 years. That was the difference they could feel and never name. Everything we have sat with tonight was already known 2,500 years ago, and it has not changed, because the human heart has not changed. We are still surrounded by thousands of words, of days, of things to want and chase and count. And the peace we are looking for is still where it always was, in the one word that lands, the one day truly seen, the one friend who tells the truth, the one small flame attended completely. It is worth resting, for a moment, in how these words reached this room at all. They were spoken before they were ever written, in groves and on roadsides, to farmers and merchants and worried parents, people whose evenings were as full as ours. For centuries they were carried in memory alone, recited in the dark by people who had decided these sayings were worth more than almost anything else they owned. Then they were written and copied again, by hand, by lamplight, one line at a time, through wars and floods and the rise and fall of kingdoms, by thousands of people whose names no one recorded. Every one of those copyists worked the lamplighter's way, because there is no other way. One line, attended completely, 10,000 times, across 25 centuries. And the long chain of all that patient attention ends, tonight, here, in your room, in these hours. The verses have been on their way to this evening for a very long time. They asked nothing of the people who carried them, and they asked nothing of you. That has always been their manner. They do not argue or insist. They simply say the small true thing and fall silent, and wait, sometimes for years, for the moment a person is still enough to hear it. Tonight you gave them that stillness. Whatever they had for you has been delivered. Nothing more needs to be gathered tonight. You do not need to remember the verses, or the stories, or any of what was said. What was meant for you has already sunk to where it will be kept, and it will rise on its own, some ordinary day, exactly when it is needed. That is how these old words have always worked. They are patient. They have waited centuries. They can wait until morning. And tomorrow, the teachings of this night will be waiting in the most ordinary places. Somewhere in the day, there will be a sentence worth hearing all the way to the bottom, spoken by someone who may not know they are saying it. There will be a stretch of minutes, on a walk or at a sink or in a doorway, that asks only to be noticed while it is here. There will be a feeling that arrives wanting to run the afternoon, and a small space beside it where a person can stand. There may even be a hard, true, kind word, given or received. None of it has to be remembered as practice, and none of it has to be done well. The verses were never a list of duties. They are descriptions of how a heart naturally behaves as it comes to peace, and hearts move in that direction on their own when they are given evenings like this one. Whatever was planted tonight will find its own occasions. You will simply notice, some ordinary day, that you let a contest pass that you once would have joined, or heard a sentence land that you once would have hurried past, and you will not even remember where the change began. This is how the old teachings have always done their work. Never all at once, and never by force. A person hears them on an ordinary night, and nothing visible happens. The next day looks like every other day. But something has been set in motion, far below the surface, where the lasting changes are made. Months later, a moment opens, and the right verse is simply there, risen on its own, fitting the moment exactly, as though it had been waiting just out of sight for its occasion. People who live long with these words all describe the same thing. They did not study their way into peace. They kept gentle company with the teachings, evening after evening, and the peace accumulated quietly, like warmth in a wall that has faced the sun all day. And one season they noticed they had become someone a little different, and could not say when it had happened. The body has already understood all of this, in its own language. It has been growing heavier through every story, settling without being asked, the breath finding the slow evening pace it knows by heart. The breath has been keeping its own count all night, rising and falling, and it has never once needed your help. It will keep that count until morning, faithful as a lamplighter on his route, one breath at a time, which is the only way breathing has ever been done. And the room you are in has been doing its own settling alongside you. The walls have given up the day's heat. The small sounds of the house have spaced themselves further and further apart. The world outside the window has lowered its voice, and the dark has come all the way in and made itself comfortable, as it does every night, without ever being invited or thanked. Everything around you has already finished the day. You are simply the last one being waited for, and there is no hurry. The night has nowhere else to be. For now, there is only the rest the last verse promised. The day is finished, and it asks nothing more of you. The night is very old and very good at its work. Let it hold what you have been holding. We will return another night with another chapter when you are ready. Until then, sleep well and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk.